All right, YouTube, there's a government shutdown in effect right now. And of course, the Democrats are blaming the Republicans, and the Republicans are blaming the Democrats. And Obama's blaming Congress, and the Congress is blaming Obama. And if you look at any news story about it, you see an ongoing civil war like battle between these different groups of people, all basically claiming that it's one another's fault. I don't understand why people are so concerned about this. We woke up, cat sneezing at the moment. We woke up today. What has changed? What's different? NASA, gets shut down. Okay, well, Obama had already cut funding to NASA to the point where they weren't doing anything particularly important anymore, other than they're still operating the Mars rover, and there's a couple of satellites that are beaming back info from the edge of charted space. Um, Other than that, what difference has been made? I don't feel any different. The post office is still running. The military is still operating. Congress is still there doing what they always do. Apparently, half of them were drunk at the time that they were doing these debates, as though it was so stressful to simply talk about issues and deal with the other party that they needed a nightcap. There's In my opinion, we should just leave the government shut down. Let's leave the government shut down partially for an entire year and tell Congress, don't even bother to start it back up. Just let it stay shut down for a year. I think most Americans would be surprised to see how very little it affects them. How very little actually changes during a government shutdown. It's happened before. It shut down for something like 2 weeks at one point back in the 1990s. It wasn't a big issue. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have any real effect. These are non-essential jobs. If they're non-essential, why do we even need to keep them on? There's the NSA, one of the Democratic senators there arguing in the Senate, I can't remember which one, was like, well, our surveillance apparatus will be partially shut down and all of these people will be sent home and these people keep us safe from terrorists and blah, blah, blah. If the American people had bothered to tune into C-SPAN, they probably would have heard that and said, wow, the surveillance system won't be completely up and running if we defund the government. Let's go forward and defund it. Because a lot of people were and still are concerned about the NSA spying and things of that nature. Why does it matter? And to cast blame around makes absolutely no sense. It takes two to tango. It took both parties not willing to work with one another, because let's look at it. The Democrats pointed this out. Oh, well, Obama got reelected and you haven't gotten over it, and they elected a majority Democratic Senate. Well, they also elected a majority Republican House. You've got split government right now. What you've got is a situation where the American people, in essence, have said, we don't really trust either of the parties, so we're not giving either of you complete control. If one party was clearly better than the other, had better ideas, was doing better, was more honest, was more fiscally restrained, had better ideas for the budget, whatever, both the House and Senate and the presidency would be filled by the same party. You'd have one party in control of all of these institutions. Because if the American people trusted one of the parties over the other and wasn't split up into a bunch of partisan bickering and didn't, in general, dislike both of the parties as regards their work in Congress, then one of them would be in control and the other would be subservient and essentially just be there. There'd be the occasional filibuster and that'd be about it. And it's happened before. There have been times when the House and Senate and the presidency are all filled by the same party, when people feel that one party has made a much better statement of their goals, has shown much more constraint and restraint, has shown that they have better ideas. That's not the case right now. What people have essentially, whenever you've got split government, essentially what you have is a situation in which people have said neither party is truly better than the other. Right now, both parties are about the same. They can't agree on anything. They're bickering over a few amendments because the Republicans wanted to delay Obamacare's mandate for a year and add an amendment that would force Congress to have the same, enter the exchanges, to have the same health care plan that all the other Americans have. I personally don't understand why that particular amendment was a big sticking issue for the Democrats. it doesn't really, it does make sense. I think the majority of Americans, they will blame the Republicans for the shutdown. This has happened before, and they usually do when the president is a Democrat. Doesn't matter who's the sitting president, they generally blame the Congress, and the House is controlled by the Republicans, so they're blaming them. So they'll blame the Republicans either way. I think the majority of Americans, however, would have no problem with having Congress and their staff in the same exchanges as the rest of the population. It was very strange that they were exempted from these exchanges. It was also very strange that certain unions were exempted, and they typically were unions that heavily supported Obama. Those same unions, however, are now against the implementation of Obamacare. But this wasn't even really an Obamacare issue. In defense of the Democrats, it had really nothing to do with passing a budget and simply not having the government shut down. But that being said, who cares? People were acting like it would be the end of the world. There were a whole bunch of people on Twitter saying it's going to be like the purge, and does this mean the military shuts? They don't even know what a government shutdown means, by the way, most of these people. They think that a government shutdown means DC's closed, there are no politicians, there's no military, everything goes to hell, the roads don't get paved, nothing happens. That's what they honestly think a government shutdown means, which couldn't be further from the truth. What this is a partial cut to non-essential jobs. None of these jobs are truly necessary for the security and safety of our country. They aren't. It's like we look at NASA, for instance. We say, well, that's a great part of our government science. It's real important. Yes, I would agree. I support NASA completely. I think they should get more funding than they get. I think that in addition to space exploration, they do a great deal of partnerships with academic organizations. They turn out some excellent scientists. Some of these people also go into medicine. Some of them go into ballistics or any of a million other fields. I do like NASA a great deal. I think it's a very worthy institution. But is it necessary for the day-to-day functions of the country? No. It is not necessary for the day-to-day functions of our country. It's true. It's a peripheral program. It's an optional program. It's a program that if we were to have depression, it would probably get cut severely or not exist at all. Right now, we have economic problems in this country. That's clear. Both of the parties agree on this. All the American people agree on this. Nobody has any illusions that we have budgeting problems right now. We've got debt. We've got a problem funding some of the social programs. There have been planned cuts to the military, the sequester, all sorts of problems. Unemployment, inflation, you've got it all right now. Nothing could be better than to start cutting some of these government programs. You simply cannot fund them. When you have a downturned economy, you can do one of two things. You can either use a debt-based economy to try to stimulate things and stimulate job growth, and then you sort of slack that off as it levels out. It's been tried before by many countries. Very rarely it works. Often it does not work or doesn't work very well. We're in one of those situations right now where, yes, it saved some jobs and created some others. The problem being the burden of the extra taxes that have been generated has crushed private industry. There's no question that Obamacare has destroyed jobs. And the jobs that it hasn't destroyed, a lot of people right now in the lower and middle classes are getting their hours cut. There's no debate over that whatsoever. Most of the jobs that are being created are part-time jobs. By the way, Obamacare, for its implementation, considers you full-time by getting 29 hours a week. So people are cutting them down below 29 hours a week. The average person, thus, if they're in the lower or middle class, they have to have 2 jobs. That's just not feasible for some people. They're not capable. They don't have enough time to do such things. How can you possibly start your own business if you've got this extra tax? And that's what it is. Obamacare is a tax. The Supreme Court agrees with me on this. The Supreme Court, I can't remember which justice it was that switched sides and voted for Obamacare being legal, gave his justification. He said, I'm not justifying this as a medical program, it's a tax. A rather large tax. Now, of course, yes, we need extra tax revenue to deal with the debt. The thing is that Obama and the Democrats were always saying, well, we'll raise it on the rich. This is hitting mainly the middle and lower classes. It's very strange that this was implemented when it was. I think it was a good idea on paper. This is my thought on Obamacare. And I'll mix this in because it ties in with the reason why the government shut down anyway, because that's the sticking point between the Republicans and Democrats. Those are the extra riders that were attached to the bill. My thought on Obamacare, it was a good idea on paper. I think Obama had a generally good idea. The Democrats had a generally good idea. The Republicans largely, some of them, agreed with this. And of course, it's modeled after Romney Care. The problem is when you try to pass such a law in DC, it gets cut to pieces, reassembled, and has all sorts of things added on, all sorts of thousands of pages of regulations because it's full of bureaus and lobbies and unions and special interest groups. And they tack on page after page of material and regulations to what would otherwise have been a fairly straightforward idea, which is simply, let's lower the cost of insurance for the poor, keep it about the same for the middle class, but increase the variety and stop discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions, which is one part of Obamacare I completely support. DC doesn't work that way anymore. There's so many bureaus and so many lobbies, and these groups exist in such a huge plurality and have such power that any bill that's created gets completely transmogrified. People don't seem to understand that. They think that it's just Congress and just the president that deal with laws. You've got millions of other people who have their hands in every aspect of DC. They control the Senate, they control the House, they co-opt Obama, they co-opted Bush. That's why some of the bills passed during his time that weren't popular got changed around too. Right now, our economy's hurting, and you have this government right now saying, well, we can't pay our bills, so we're shutting down the government. But just a few weeks ago, they were talking about spending billions of dollars invading Syria. And they're still spending hundreds of billions probably a year on our surveillance apparatus that is wildly unpopular, and even some people in Congress don't support anymore. These people don't have their heads screwed on right. They're spending money on things we can't really afford and then complaining that we don't have enough money, so by the way, we need new taxes and we need this universal healthcare system that most people no longer want because it's been made clear to them that for the average person it's going to cost them money. And I hate to say it, the average person my age is not going to opt into Obamacare. They're going to pay the fine. So it's essentially a rather large tax on us because in a few years that goes up to 2.5% of your income or something like $690 that you have to pay in a fine. My goodness, what's this going to do to people who are already working part-time because full-time jobs have disappeared? They're not going to be able to pay that. They don't have the money. They're living paycheck to paycheck. This is a great way to squish out the poor and put them on welfare. But essentially what you've got is you've got the middle class becoming more poor. The poor people are going on welfare, and the rich people are being taxed too. Most of them, because they're corporate leaders or union leaders or whatever, they don't have to buy into Obamacare, but their income is going down too potentially because they're hiring a larger number of people for shorter numbers of hours. They've got to give some of their regular workers this health care. This is a terrible, terrible idea, and people, again, the Democrats blame it on the Republicans and say, well, they had their way with this bill and they attached all sorts of stuff. You controlled the Senate. You could have stopped anything that you had wanted. You didn't stand in their way. You voted for these things. Now you live with them too. And I think that the ultimate hypocrisy is the fact that Congress is wailing and whining, the Senate in particular, over adding simply an amendment that forces Congress and their staff into the same exchanges. It's ridiculous. What's good for the goose should be good for the gander. They say, well, we've got a federally managed health care, and this is for federal employees, so we don't see... It doesn't matter. If you're going to put the rest of the population under this stress, put yourselves under this stress. 2.5% of the income of the average senator is quite a chunk of change. I would think that we could make quite a bit of money as a nation if we put that extra tax on the senators and representatives, my goodness, it'd be millions and millions of dollars a year. We could use that for something else. Maybe we could fund NASA with some of that money. But these people don't have a leg to stand on. Anyone who's saying that it's just one party or the other has no clue what they're talking about. It takes both parties to formulate these laws. Both parties have put their heads in the ground and heads in the sand, and they're being stubborn. Because the Republicans say, well, we don't like Obamacare. And the Democrats say, well, we don't like your riders. So they just bury themselves and they say, do nothing. And now the government's shut down. But for the average person, it makes no difference. Federal employees get paid to stay at home. They're loving it right now. Personally, I think they shouldn't get their back pay. They should, if during a shutdown, potentially a shutdown in some scenarios could be used to actually save money for the economy. They shouldn't get their back pay. The military should get its back pay because they're an essential part of the economy. I think we could rearrange the military budget and save quite a few tens of billions of dollars a year. But yeah, the soldiers should get their back pay. But these federal employees, and NSA people and the CIA and whatever, who gives a fuck about them? All they do is sit on a computer all day and read people's private emails and violate the Constitution anyway. Who gives a fuck about them? What kind of people enter that line of work? You have to have something wrong with you to even want such a job, unless you have no other choice, because then you can actually get full-time work and get a good salary. Then you can afford healthcare. You can afford private healthcare. You don't even have to take the Obama plan, which is basically you pay through the nose and get basically nothing out of it. But this is a huge fiasco. But, again, it does not, the shutdown, the Obamacare does, the shutdown does not really affect the day-to-day function of the economy. It doesn't really affect the majority of people living in the country. If the Republicans are smart, they'll keep it shut down. They'll keep it shut down for months and months until it goes out of the news cycle because people lose interest in talking about it. And at that special moment, many people will come to the realization that a lot of these jobs in the government weren't necessary, that it didn't affect them, that really they're not important.